It's going to start going now. Are we live? I think it's entirely possible that that it's live.
You think we might actually be on air?
I think we might. And I'm using this new software. I don't know whether or not it's according to this 7 seconds. Well, all right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Fake Accents Unite. The colourful bars at the bottom of my screen indicate that something to do with volume is going on, and so hopefully
we definitely hope you can hear us.
So certainly we hope that you can hear us. Do let us know, and let's see where we go from here. Yes, people are saying yes in the chat. It's nice to hear them. Lovely.
Yes, I'm looking on YouTube, and it's telling me that there is something live on your channel, so that we should be here, I think.
Beautiful. As you can tell from the dulcet tones, you are hearing the voice of co-host the Britisher, who... How long have we been doing this now? How long, do you reckon?
I don't know. Too long, no doubt.
Must be. We're on episode 127. So at least 2 years, I would say.
I'm just looking at your title page today, and we've got all these... Chinese communist acolytes, I guess one could call them, holding their red book. And is that a picture of your good self
and you'll
on the front of that red book?
Well, you'll notice a larger version of that red book is coming around every so often, and it does say, there it is, quotations from Chairman NSO. So
okay, yes.
My
so,
own.
I guess your answer to my question is a big yes.
Indeed, and these are my minions who are carrying it around through North Korea or China or wherever, right? So that's basically just some fan art, and it's nice to get some kind of fan memes and that sort of thing. So just to let you know that if you're interested in doing that sort of thing, please submit your silly memes and that sort of thing to us. We do love to put them on the show. You can send them to us via Twitter or Discord.
I'm glad you continued that sentence, because you came to a halt after please submit.
Yeah.
I hope it continues at some point. Yes, the sentence then went on after a brief pause.
Never say that I'm not a kind and generous master. I'll ask you to please submit rather than just demanding your submission. Very well.
What's the one in 300? Am I not a kind and generous ruler?
Oh God.
Leonidas demands you stand, whereas with me you can just kneel.
It's been a long time actually since I've gone anywhere near 300. I remember disliking the visual style immensely, but I was forced to watch it by friends.
I quite like the film because it does what it says on the tin. It doesn't go beyond that. So it's not trying to be Ben-Hur, and therefore I've got quite a lot of goodwill for it. When it comes to Gladiator is trying to be the grand epic and doesn't manage that, so therefore I'm considerably more critical of it. I understand what you mean with the visual style, but I think they kind of managed to pull it off. There are some ludicrous things, how realistic really is it to think that there were men running around in leather underpants back in those days? Just the obvious things.
All ripped apart from that one dude who happened to be a cripple. Yes.
Well, that side of things, I actually quite liked the sort of exaggeration of the visual in order to sort of create this sort of impression by a fairly primitive Greek culture that anything coming at them must be monstrous, or anything that deviates from them is monstrous. So I could kind of see what they were trying to do, and I must say I think they pulled that off quite well.
Well,
Of course, they immediately got accused of being anti-Persian by the Iranians and all sorts of things.
of course. Well, there are all sorts of complaints that could be levied. I mean, it's it's a Spartan culture, and yet there was very little homosexuality in it, and that would have irritated certain woke crowds. And
I mean, that's when the leather underpants come in, surely.
and when we go around full circle, and the coin has flipped. There'll be accusations that there wasn't enough heterosexual representation or something in it.
Yes, of course.
On the other side,
there were some hideous lines somewhere around the death scene. Where dying warriors are thanking the king. It is telling him how it was an honor to have served him. Blah blah blah. And you just think, you're not really. That really does seem a bit cringe the way it's being done. As in, die already, will you? But other than that, I think it was, of course we had to have the strong female in Sparta doing all the real governing, because the men can go and fight in leather underpants, but it still needs a strong woman to run things.
Of course. I mean, speaking of cringe in cinema, I have watched a couple of films this week which I hadn't watched before. What's the? It's a biopic. Robin Williams, Doctor, Patch something.
Oh, Patch Adams.
Patch Adams. I watched that.
Yeah, that's one of the failed ones of his, I believe.
That was a really. I mean, you know how jaded I am when I'm watching this, and of course, they're trying to. For those of you who don't know, the premise of the film is Robin Williams plays a man who is suicidal, and he doesn't know what to do, and he checks himself into a mental institution, and then after he finds that the doctors there aren't treating him, but he treats himself by helping the other patients, and so he checks himself out of the mental institution against medical advice, and then embarks on a journey to become a doctor. It's a true story. The guy's still alive today, and then at the end he opens a free clinic because there's a huge tone of criticism of the American medical system, right down to the ethos, and in particular the practice of transference. So the idea that you dehumanize your patients in order to not get personally attached, so that you can act like a robot and do a better job. But it was a pretty good film, but there was so much Hollywood cringe in there. So much Hollywood cringe, right down to the fact that he gives an impassioned, they're about to, throw him out of the hospital, potentially for, misconduct and that sort of thing, and being, too bizarre. And he gives his impassioned speech, and then when they return the verdict from the court of the doctors are turned to the very stereotypical dean of the school, who's the one who's brought the charges against him, and say, "You could learn something from this man," and then everybody cheered. And it was just like, oh, it hurts. Not to mention the fact that over the course of the thing, some might say he was a bit insufferable because he continued to go and see patients. The rule is they don't see patients until the third year, because they're learning all the medical stuff first. They're not qualified, so he has to wait until he gets his white coat, then he can see the patients. He constantly sneaks into the hospital so that he can play games with the children and kind of bring some positivity to people, and it has a real effect, but it's he keeps getting brought up on it, and I was like, dude, is a year really too much to wait? You're risking, you could bring all the joy and the passion and all this stuff as soon as you get out of medical school. Right, clearly you're not going to let this go. You're not going to let them beat it out of you. And then, but on the other side, you're jeopardizing all of that for the sake of, a small number of patients when you're going to end up working with a large number of patients. Now, obviously, it all worked out in the end, and he does operate a free hospital now, although it is seemingly tied up a lot with a lot of alternative medicine and some weird stuff, and I don't know what to think of the actual man himself. But yeah, just a lot of Hollywood cringe in there, and including
I think that particular film was a bit of a flop, and generally is not. When it comes to Robin Williams, he had some very big successes, but he also had some absolute clangers. But that was, in a way, the nature of working with the man. So basically, it worked or it didn't.
Yeah, he plays himself in every every role, so you've got to be kind of prepared for that.
The vehicle either functioned or it didn't. Children, this was the way films were made before they just decided to stick everybody in latex underpants and call them a superhero and put a letter on their chest. And you could be sure that the Chinese would want to watch it, alongside with Americans who are unaware of there being a catalogue of older films that are much better. But yes, there was the risk of just basically bombing with Robin Williams, but at the same time, if he got it right, you could have Good Morning Vietnam.
I still need to watch Good Morning Vietnam. I'm trying. It was available to me, and now it's not, so I'm going to have to find another copy, basically, because that was next on my list. Although I've had about as much of Robin Williams as I can take for a short while. That's just.
Well, there's also the Dead Poets Society, isn't there?
Is it? I've heard mixed on that, but yeah.
What's the other film? Because you said you'd watched two, so you'd suffered through that one. So what's the other one you've?
Oh goodness, I watched a couple of things.
Neither of them being Ben-Hur, I guess.
Neither of them were Ben-Hur. Or, if I was to watch Ben-Hur, you know full well I would.
Or The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or Once Upon a Time in the West, or decent films. The Third Man. The Seven Samurai.
Look, you know full well that if I were to watch any film, it would be the remake of Ben-Hur, just so that I could say, well, that wasn't as good as you.
Ben-Hur is a remake.
Yeah, I know. Another remake. They did another remake.
Charlton Heston's version is a remake. The original is a silent movie, black and white film, I believe.
Yes, but as I
understand, Ben-Hur has a spectacular story. Go on.
As I understand it, there is a remake of the remake.
Oh yes,
right, which was like,
don't even think of watching that, you cretin.
That's the sort of
you
thing.
would just watch that to annoy me, wouldn't you?
Yes, that's what I've been trying to tell you for the last couple of minutes. The other film I watched in the region of that kind of cringe was School of Rock, with Jack Black.
I will let you off with School of Rock. School of Rock has a certain charm to it.
It does.
I have tried watching it again, and it doesn't repeat well. But the first time you see it, yes, it's fun, it's silly, but you can have just silly, brainless, twaddle. It doesn't. As long as it's entertaining, as long as it works,
as long as it's got a good soundtrack,
and that one I think it does work. It's stupendously daft, but it does work. Yes,
I certainly enjoyed it. That's but it is cringe, and I recognise.
I think we found your level. Yes.
Super cringe.
Well, no, I wouldn't say it's cringe.
There are plenty.
I would say the Patch Adams thing definitely is cringe. But School of Rock, I think, is just light-hearted silliness, to be honest.
I've offended the chat. What's wrong with School of Rock? School of Rock is a bloody fine film. And I'm going, all right, dude.
Yes, no doubt, it's an epic masterpiece, is it?
Oh, Britisher, stop being such a cynical old bastard. It's fine, it's a good film, but it is it's a feel-good family romp. That's how I describe it.
It doesn't need 300. It does what it says on the tin.
It didn't need to break new ground.
So it's a competent film.
It is a competent film.
But it's nothing. It's no outstanding piece, if you know what I mean.
How did we end up on film once again? Good grief!
You told us what you had been suffering through.
No, but I think you brought it up first. But there we are. You brought something up anyway. I don't know.
I bring many a thing up when I'm on here. This is enough to turn anyone's stomach.
I didn't know whether or not you were referring to something bile-worthy or something more in the arousal department.
No, I assure you it wouldn't be in the arousal department. No, it would be bile-worthy, I think, yes.
Well, people should know.
We've just created a new term, haven't we? Bile-worthiness.
If we get a subscriber notification, to catch people up, I've changed software. So we're slightly delayed this evening because I've changed the software. I'm now using Streamlabs OBS as opposed to just OBS. Now, all that means for you as the viewer is extra widgets. So if people send in super chats, that sort of thing, they appear on the screen. There should be a little jingle of sorts. And we should also, get some little animations on the screen. So one of them is if we get a new subscriber over the course of the show, there's a rather interesting voice line which I'm hoping will get played at some point that the Britisher will adore. But
you swine!
We'll go over that.
So just to ask you, because you mentioned jingle, are you actually? Well, you won't be, will you? You won't remember jingles in advertisements.
Sort
where
of.
Advertisements had jingles.
Yes.
No? Oh, you actually do.
Yes, I'm
this,
not.
This still happened within your lifetime.
I'm not a child. Yes.
Well, you say. But
all right, old man.
Well, no,
tell me how it is.
These days, you don't really hear many advertising jingles, do you?
No.
It seems to be a dead art by now.
Well, there's no Asda price. Ting ting. Every little helps. There's all these little not to mention the radio jingles as well, right?
Where's the
the
boundary between a slogan and a jingle? If you know what I mean.
Well, exactly. It needs to have a little tingle, a tingle.
So yes, I'll grant you the ting ting at the end of the.
That's gone now, as far as I'm aware, anyway.
Yeah.
So even these little nods to jingles, or to jingle culture, as we shall call it, have all apparently disappeared. So, yes, although to be fair, it's been.
Well, isn't there a wonderful one? I ask you, why am I asking you? Because you will never have seen the film City Slickers, will you?
I've never even heard of it, my good man.
Billy Crystal in that film, before he, goes to the American countryside to find himself, he's basically being told by his boss how, this is just hideous. You're not doing a job right. And he is the chap who is supposed to commission advertisements for radio. And the boss just comes into his office and plays this cassette tape of this advert, and it's just hideous. It's just about the worst pizza advert you could imagine. Some guy shouting "Pizza Man, Pizza Man" into the microphone, and he just looks at him and goes, "People are having accidents," and throws the tape into the bin. City Slickers is well worth a watch. That's a very good comedy. I think you would find City Slickers is a highly superior comedy to something like School of Rock. School of Rock is competent. City Slickers is really, really funny, and that's an outstanding one. So there's your recommendation, a film recommendation for the day, City Slickers.
Marvellous. I'll have forgotten it by the end of the show, but
of course you will. I mean,
thank you for.
What have you ever watched that I have recommended? Yes,
I did watch something you recommended, but it was so long ago that it's completely escaped my mind. I watched all of Jeeves and Wooster. That was a Britisher recommendation. There you go.
Okay, and no doubt you hated every moment of it.
No, I
so terrible.
I adored everything except the last season.
Well, yes, the last few parts, particularly that drainage cleaning thing.
Okay.
Plumbo Jumbo or whatever it's called. That's pretty hideous. Yes. And that episode with the blackface in it. Not because it's blackface, it's just because it's not funny. where he tries to pretend to be some African king. Yes.
Yeah, with the minstrels and so on. Yeah, okay, yeah.
No, the minstrels one, that still worked, but some of the things beyond that, no.
Okay, so people in chat have got it into their head. They've put a series of jingles into the chat.
Oh, go on then.
I will read them, and then you will read them in your fake accent. Are you ready?
In my fake accent, okay.
In your fake accent.
I mean, given that we both officially have got terribly fake accents, it will be just fake accents on repeat, won't it?
I think that's just us every week, British. I don't know further. A finger of fudge is just enough.
A finger of fudge is just enough.
Yeah, I'd say you could sell Camel cigarettes with that kind of sultry summer tone.
Mind you, the Camel Man. Are you familiar with the Camel Man? There was this guy.
Yeah, the Camel Man. Yeah, they were famous.
Oh yeah. Precisely. He was always somewhere with a Land Rover, crossing a river in the jungle, while smoking a camel. I think in the end, this may be an urban myth, but in the end, he died of lung cancer, I believe.
Oh, that would be poetically, there would be poetic justice, I suppose, in that. But, of course, I've seen all of the... Because, of course, with the whole pandemic thing, everyone's been... the people on the denial side have been throwing up the whole medical advice was Camel cigarettes with the appropriate posters in terms of being anti this vaccination. And there are plenty.
Very macho, those advertisements. I remember. You had the Camel Man, then you had the Marlboro Man.
Well, yes, but you'll notice that several of them, they have the person, the doctor or the model or whatever, reclining back. He's taking a toke on a cigarette, or he's just finished, and the frame of the poster, the cigarette kind of almost comes out of the frame. It like as in it overlaps with the edge of the border of the either the painting or the photograph, and so it's kind of reaching out to offer it to you. Like, there's marketing 101. Okay.
It was either a very sort of very masculine figure. It didn't need to be someone terribly good looking by the look of it. It was a terribly masculine figure, or it was a very fetching young lady, or in some superlative adverts, it was a very masculine figure together with a very fetching young lady. But yes, do you remember which car was it? I think it was McLaren. McLaren Formula One cars were effectively Marlboro cigarette packets on wheels. The entire car was painted in the manner of a Marlboro cigarette packet.
I see.
Which is kind of, given what these cars look like today, it's hard to imagine. Also, Lotus was John Player Special. Again, it was pretty much the cigarette packet, just with wheels.
Classic.
Those were the days, people.
Do you want to hear our next jingle?
Go on.
Go compare. Go compare. You can be sure when you insure with Go Compare. When your choices are many, you can save a pretty penny when you go online to Go Compare. And you can find...
You can't possibly expect me to remember all this.
In stream chat, I have placed the lines for you to read.
Oh, that'll be the day. All I can say is go compare, go compare. Did I really just do that?
I think that perhaps a foolish decision on your part there, Britisher. Especially with the run in there of all I can say is, and that's I'm definitely going to clip that and use that for if anyone
then again,
gives us.
There's one thing you can't do, and that is you can't give me comparethemeerkat.com.
No.
because giving that to me to read is ridiculous, because the one person you have to ask, as we all know, is V, who is actually the other persona of Alexander the Meerkat.
Well, naturally. I am going to have to... I still can't get over your Go Compare. The cry, the outpouring of spirit there. It was the most energy I've heard you pour into your voice in a long time.
I love the Durex car. Is that actually an old F1, or is that a different is that sort of an F3 car or something like that?
The Durex car. I don't know F1, but apparently they sponsored an F1 team.
In the stream chat, Owain has put a photograph of a Durex car.
Indeed.
He says it's an F1 team. I'm not sure if it looks F1-ish, but I mean, it could just be because it's, they're that old. This sort of has a 1970s look to it.
Indeed. I would show it, but Discord is playing up at the moment. Maybe at some point. Yeah. I am going to put that... let me just say Go Compare thing, and if people give us a ludicrous amount of money, it will play over their donation. But that would be the smart thing to do. Well,
no doubt YouTube will then try and do you for
copyright infringement
in a sort of an advert for Go Compare.
Somebody's put 1 million housewives every day pour baked beans over Tim Brooke Taylor.
Okay, 1 million housewives every day. Does that continue, or is that the thing itself?
It says here 1 million housewives every day pour baked beans over Tim Brooke Taylor. I don't know where the poor baked beans.
Tim Brooke Taylor?
I have no idea. We're going to have to look this up. Colin P. Smith is swearing, at his computer screen, clearly. Tim Brooke Taylor, OBE, was an actor.
The face rings a bell, yes.
And comedian.
One of the goodies.
Yes, the goodies. I love the goodies. I need to watch the goodies again. It's been years since I've watched the goodies. I mean, that was one of my childhood favourites. He was in Banana Man as well. Amazing. What was it? I watched the other day with John D and company. I watched the first episode of Fawlty Towers again. That was a great show.
Okay, yes.
Which is the one.
Fawlty Towers to me is the triumph over script writing. By script writing over finance. So today they would never make something like that. They would spend fortunes on a set that would be just perfectly lifelike, and
it's not. It's
therefore. Go ahead.
It's not even that. Because they would have such an enormous budget, they would be thinking with enormously broad horizons. All of the different scenarios that they could put people in, rather than going, okay, we've got just enough money for an office, the entrance hallway, and the dining room. What are we going to do with this, right? That's...
but once in a while when John Cleese clobbers Manuel, so, when he bangs his head against the wall and things like that, the whole set quick fire things like not the 9 o'clock news or whatever.
Well, one of the things...
which is much funnier than anything Harry and Paul have produced in recent years.
I will disagree with you that not the 9 o'clock news was funny.
Dear God.
Oh no, maybe am I confusing it with Drop the Dead Donkey, which was atrocious? I don't know. One of them.
Not the 9 o'clock news had Rowan Atkinson in it.
Yes, but I considered it one of his weaker outings. Anyway, apparently I'm being told in the goodies they did an advert where Tim, as a child, ended up with a tin of beans poured over him, which is why he gave us that line. The other thing with Fawlty Towers is you can tell that an awful lot of it is done over the course of a singular day, and that he is just perspiring an enormous amount. Just over the course, he just goes from, he becomes sweatier and sweatier over the course of the episode.
Well, yes, that sort of manic performance he produced must have taken it out of him physically, and you actually see it happening on screen. Yes,
and there's the great recurring gag of Sybil asking him to put the painting up, and he put the picture on the wall. Oh, fine, I'll go put the picture on the wall. And then, of course, he goes, he lifts it up. The audience is there with the expectation. And then something comes along and he has to put the picture down, usually slamming it down, and go off. And just the ridiculousness. I kind of liken it to there's a really good TED Talk from a chap who is a little bit misguided and believes that classical music is making an enormous return. But he does do a lovely thing where he says to the audience, nobody is tone deaf, and he plays an arpeggiated scale downwards. So he goes da da da. I'm going up there. Anyway, he plays this. I'm not going to try and reproduce it because I am not tone deaf, but I am audibly not a great singer. Anyway. So he plays this...
unlike me with Go Compare.
Yes. So he plays this arpeggiated scale down and gets everybody to... He misses the last note and gets everybody to R the last note, right? And everybody does, of course. So he goes, everyone could do that, or most people can. So he then plays a piece of music where there are a load of arpeggios in it and they all miss this final note. And he goes, well, everybody knows where the natural end of the sequence is, but we can't stop there because then the piece of music would be over, and so we run ourselves back up the piano and then we go back down and that sort of thing, and then we do it. And so it kind of reminds me of that, like so many false endings, but of course in Fawlty Towers it never pays off. Because he just never gets the painting up on the wall.
He's always there with the painting, holding it up to the required height, and that something will occur, and somebody is needed, and he's there with the painting in his hands, going, Sybil.
Yes, and she goes, I'm going out down the shops,
Then he puts the picture down, and goes, right. It's that when he goes right. That's he has sort of that many different tones of just increasing anger just in that simple word, right? It's a thing of beauty, Fawlty Towers.
It's a marvelous show.
I remember they did one of those series on the BBC once where they asked various celebrities to effectively champion a particular sitcom, and then people would vote for what their favourite sitcom was and whatever. So it was, no doubt a way of bulking out the programme. Because, what is achieved? You might as well instead try to make a sitcom rather than a programme about sitcoms, if you know what I mean. But there was sort of some interesting things said, and I remember the comedian who was championing the cause of Fawlty Towers just showed you the script, the printed script of, a given episode of such and such sitcom, and said, this is about average for any sitcom. And then he said, and this is the Fawlty Towers script. And you could just see it was about 3 times as thick. And he said, Connie Booth and John Cleese simply just planned it down to the absolute minutiae. Nothing that happens in Fawlty Towers is happening by chance.
No, nothing's unscripted.
It's all pre-planned.
Yes. Amazing. It is, I'd love to see it done on stage. That's the thing. It comes off to me as almost as a theatre production because, of course, the limited sets and everything.
It is very theatrical, yes. But the problem is, of course, you can only do it with John Cleese.
Okay,
and the man is now of a certain age.
Yes,
no, I honestly don't think anybody can be Basil Fawlty.
All right.
I don't think you could substitute him with another actor.
I didn't mean to attack you personally, Britisher. Have you? It's weird to think that the first episode aired 46 years ago. Does that make you feel old?
Many a thing makes me feel old. Faulty Towers, not really so much, because I wasn't really aware of its launch during my lifetime. But there are many a things that sort of occur these days that you go, no, no, that can't possibly have happened 30 years ago. No.
A 20-year-old Britisher missed the opening of Fawlty Towers. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it here first. Are you ready for our next jingle?
Go on then.
For MASH, get Smash.
Oh, are those the aliens who are advertising Smash Mash and cackling like a certain vice president?
Like hyena. Hyenas, I don't know. Hyena. Where on earth was I going with that one? Not exactly. You can tell I don't speak
I don't
Latin.
know. You just, I hinted at Kamala Harris, and for some reason, I mean, she's hyena sprung to mind with you. Yes, not that I have any idea why that would be.
I mean, there's also the aliens from Mars Attacks, which also spring to mind, but I couldn't think why either. Just it's amazing what inferences can be drawn just when you mention a singular name.
Well, there is that. Yes.
What do we have here? Lip smacking ace tasting. I've no idea what that refers to.
Lip smacking ace tasting. No, that.
Only
that part of me. No.
Only the tastiest, flakiest. Don't know about that one. Fresh as the morning sun, Fletcher's bread.
Well, there you go. They are really now thinking deliberately of the most obscure things of which they ever heard.
No, I think that happiness is a cigar called Hamlet. Q Bark.
Ah, well, now, yes, those were classic adverts. It would always be some complete calamity, wouldn't it, that would befall somebody. But in the middle of catastrophe, the person would just blissfully light up a cigar, a Hamlet cigar, and take a lingers draw from the cigar as he's heading towards certain doom. It's yes, Hamlet cigars were very good adverts.
I tell you what though.
Are you at all familiar with them?
No, not really. I mean, again, before my time, but I will say,
I don't think I ever saw a Hamlet cigar advert actually, on television as an advert, but I have sort of retrospectively seen lots of Hamlet cigar adverts, and I must say, yes, they were top draw when it comes to, packing a little bit of entertainment into 30 seconds.
I mean, chat is telling me as well a chap named James Hunt became F1 world champion in a Marlboro-sponsored car. I will say
that will have been a McLaren.
Yes. I say whenever I think of F1, I think of a McLaren F1 car with Marlboro written on the side of it. Yes. And of course, the car's colours were the same as the packets. And now, whenever back before they changed all the packaging to be standardised in this country, if ever I saw a packet of Marlboro cigarettes, I would think of Formula One and vice versa. That's just the standard thing.
Think of Formula One, or you would think of cowboys.
And then weirdly, I never watched a Western before I was 25.
No. Marlboro, their posters that were up all over the place were always of cowboys.
Well, I think I was after the poster period then, probably. They had probably decided that wasn't very healthy to put posters of smoking cowboys up near schools or something.
Possibly, who knows? Yes,
I did find out this week that you recall that they've been cracking down on smoking. Now, I want to make it very clear that nobody on Fake Accents Unite supports smoking.
Smoked in my life. Have you ever actually smoked?
I smoked when I was.
Even as a trial, have you smoked?
I smoked when I was in the Air Force. Yes.
Oh well, there you go. See, I have never actually I've never actually taken a puff. It has never interested me. Yes.
It didn't interest me, and then you get put on one too many watches, and your guard mate smokes, and you're bored, and you want something to do to kill the time. And all of a sudden you find yourself smoking. I mean, I've never been a heavy... I was
sitting there going, I'm terribly bored. Why don't I get myself a nicotine addiction?
Well, but I've never had a nicotine addiction. That's the other thing. And I was never a heavy smoker. I never felt the draw of, needing a cigarette as opposed to just fancying one. And even when I was smoking at my heaviest, I mean, that was only because I was going out as a young officer in the Air Force, quite a lot out and spending time, socializing, and when most of the people in your profession smoke, you end up probably smoking because you want to do that. I mean, I chose to smoke, but that's just the way it was. Well,
you see, I'm just a stick in the mud type because I was, in my younger years, I was around quite a lot of heavy smokers, and I just always no. It never occurred to me to try it. I just always thought it's insane.
Yes. I mean, I can understand why that would make sense from the point of view of someone who's never smoked, right? And I was very much of the same stripe before I started.
I mean, I was never, before people conclude that I must have been one of these sort of preachy types who, you shouldn't be smoking. No, I always felt, look, you folks do what you want, but, when people were sort of, do you want a cigarette? No, not a chance, because I'd seen them all, I'm out of cigarettes, and you sort of look at these nervous wrecks desperately looking for a cigarette. And you just go, why would I ever wish to ever be in a position like that?
Yeah, I've never, as I say, I've never got to that point or understood that particular, like the manic kind of addiction, where it feels like it's a necessary part of your life. Like I was always able to go without cigarettes. It was just something when you were having a couple of drinks with your mates, you fancied a fag. That was... So
as the others would say, you were never a proper smoker.
Well, not really. I went through maybe 2 packets a month. Right, that was my...
Well, yes, but I mean, there are people who go through 2 packets a day.
Indeed. I don't know how they do it. Like, I don't know how you would have enough time to do other things in the day if you were to go through that.
Nowadays, I don't know how you could possibly afford it. But back then, it was a lot cheaper.
That's the thing. I did enjoy when I visited Poland. I picked up a pack because they were £1.60, the equivalent of, which is very different to the £15 that you will pay in the city today for a packet of cigarettes. They also, but the reason I brought cigarettes sort of up more prominently is because you may be aware that they've introduced various initiatives to try and make smoking less appealing to children. Yes? Okay, over the years. So one of the things they did, they said you can no longer buy a packet of 10 or cigarettes. You must the minimum packet size is now 20. And
yes, I mean, if you want to kill yourself, you might as well kill yourself properly. That's the argument behind it, no doubt.
Well, it was the idea was to price them out of the range of children.
Yes.
But of course, they fail to realise that children are actually quite clever, and usually quite a lot cleverer than politicians. And
what are you saying?
And so, if a group of children really wants to smoke, all they do is that they get their brother or their sister or their mother or wherever, or their friend, to buy them a pack of 20 cigarettes. Then they sell them off to all their friends, and you may end up with more children smoking than ever before, because instead of buying a pack of 10 and then having to smoke all of those to themselves, they're buying a pack of 20, smoking 10, and selling 10 off to 10 other kids who then need to have more, who want to have more,
Ladies and gentlemen, I just wish you all to note that officially here, Not So Obvious is taking the position of agreeing with the Scottish nationalists that much younger people ought to have the vote.
I am.
They're all smarter than politicians.
I've never advocated that a politician should be able to vote, Britisher. And I would not advocate that a child would either. Okay? I wouldn't even advocate that their carers vote in their stead. Ridiculous. The yes, okay. So that was one policy which was brought in. And then they decided that they would not target vaping with all of its many fruity colours and flavours, but that instead they would target menthol cigarettes. So they said,
of course,
menthol cigarettes, they're easier on the throat. They taste nicer. They're the gateway cigarette to harder cigarettes. God forbid cigars. So we must ban menthol cigarettes. And that was pretty much around the time when I quit. So didn't bother me all that much. But I found out that all the cigarette companies did was they were obviously unable to sell menthol cigarettes, but there's nothing against selling an insert which you can put into a cigarette packet, which has a menthol infusion in it, which then suffuses all of the cigarettes in a packet with menthol anyway. You're just buying it in you're just buying it in 2 stages for 30p extra, rather than just as one complete whole. And I'm just like, you look at these things and I go, like, is there any government policy that isn't just horrendously abused? I can't think of a single one that doesn't just get en masse, like, circumvented in some way,
I don't know the answer to that.
No, I've left you as stumped. I've put you at a loss for words. I mean, there are things which are enforced societally and legally, and don't murder, don't steal, that sort of thing, which all gets, but society as a whole considers these things to be bad, right? You don't steal from other people because you don't want to be stolen from yourself, and that sort of thing.
It helps if you have the people if you have them on side, if you can actually convince the people of your argument. It's much easier then to introduce a law, which is, of course, what propaganda is for.
Indeed.
When it comes to a great many things, the downfall of all of it is the fact that the people, by and large, just don't agree with it. Why do you think in some parts of the world, still today, but particularly in the past, here in Britain, smuggling along the south coast and whatever was just gargantuan. And yes, people could make money with it, but on the other hand side, people were just not sold on the laws. And yeah, if you actually manage to bring people on side, then you're fine. But yes, there are quite a few things that I feel that are sort of artificially imposed, where you've just got the feeling, yes, for some reason, those among the ruling class have kind of decided that this particular hobby horse of theirs they want to put into law, whereas the rest of the country just scratches its head and goes, what the hell is that about?
Well, I mean,
the older you get, the more often you will see that. Trust me.
I mean, the older I get, the more often I'll see it, especially given the number of laws that Blair introduced and subsequent governments, no doubt, as well. Well,
I'm glad I have by now managed to convince everybody of the deep-held love of Blair that I have always held for the particular man. I think you will recall I was going on about Blair some time ago before the sort of
Ladies and gentlemen, the Britisher has been muted to prevent your audible ears being violated by his protestations of love for the the current premier of some company that he works for, Tony Blair. There you go, ladies and gentlemen, and he's back.
Yes. What can I say? I have a special place in my black heart for
behind your beating breast lies a picture of Anthony Blair.
Yes, with lots of sort of stab wounds in it. Yes, This is the picture, of course. But no, I recall it. I distinctly recall this impression that everybody had, and I know the internet is full of people saying, "I knew right from the start." No, I'm sorry. There's a reason why he won in a landslide.
Oh, absolutely. He was a silver-tongued, slippery fish that he was.
The
yes.
Tories were completely bankrupt at that time. I mean, who would forget John Major's National Cone Hotline? These were the policies that were coming. These were the policies being presented at the National Tory Party conference.
Back up. There was a cone hotline?
Oh yes. This was the leader's speech at the Tory Party conference, in which he was introducing some of the grand ideas of the government that were, and yes, therefore they were now going to introduce a hotline, so that if you were driving along the motorway, and once again you seemed to drive along a lot of cones that seemed to mark out a construction area in which absolutely nothing was going on, then you could call the National Cone Hotline. And if need be, the cone hotline authorities would then make sure that the builders removed those cones.
And this was in 97?
Until actual work would happen.
And this was in 97?
This was somewhere around the late 90s. And the cone hotline presented to the nation the national...
So let me get this straight.
Speaker's keynote speech at the Tory Party conference by John Major.
So let me get this straight. In an era when most people... I mean, the mobile phone is a distant dream of most people. And the car phone is the... how should I put this? The mainstay of the super wealthy. Or at least
things like that,
or at least the well-off in business, and their landmark policy that's going to get them elected against Tony Blair was, oh my goodness,
it was a complete laughingstock. And you have to imagine you're up against someone like Tony Blair,
yes,
and what do?
Well,
the National Cone Hotline. I mean, if that isn't a gift, then nothing is.
Well, there's a reason I remember Tony Blair's ad campaign, despite being basically barely out of being a toddler, and I don't remember John Major in the slightest.
Oh, it was catastrophic, and so basically they got completely bushwhacked in the elections. Tony Blair was much slicker, but at the same time he also sounded much more sensible. And then came the first 3 years of the Labour government. And that's where you have to be realistic. I know, once again, there will be people out there, oh no, Labour, they do everything wrong because they're Labour and we hate them. And yes, don't listen to those people. The first 3 years of the Labour government seemed actually quite reasonable. Yes, they made this or that decision that you might not agree with, but by and large, you felt...
You know why this is, though?
Yeah, this isn't a catastrophe. They're not, some of the worries that one had about the Labour government did not come true. Plus,
Britisher!
At times you felt, yes, they're repairing all the schools that had rain coming in through the roofs. There was something like a third of all schools in the country that had to abandon a part of their building.
Britisher!
And the Labour government repaired all those things. And you looked at that and you went, hang on a moment, yes, this seems sensible. But these were the first 3 years.
Britisher!
And then it was almost as if, in their long period out of government, they had time to sit down and go, if we actually did come to power, what would we do? And therefore it seemed thought out what they were doing. But then after 3 years, all hell started breaking loose.
Britisher, let me interject! Okay. First off, I'm just laughing at the fact that you called it a long period and the colour of Labour is red. Secondly, you know full well...
The colour of Labour is red? No, but by all means, go on. I didn't get that, but go on.
Oh, Britisher, you sweet innocent soul. Britisher, the Labour, whose primary colour is a deep red, having a long period.
Okay.
But the other thing is, you know why they didn't do masses for the first 3 years. Right? How long had it been since there had been a Labour government?
Well, long time. I mean,
is good.
Thatcher was in power for something like 10 years or more. Then you had several years of John Major. So yes, this was a significant stretch. This must have been 15 years or more that they were out of power.
Let's have a look. See, we've got here 1997. Okay, right. So 97, Blair comes in. Before then, you got John Major. Before then, Margaret Thatcher. So they've been out of power for nearly for 18 years. 18 years.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they come in. So they've got very few people in the party who are used to actually operating the levers of government. And secondly, you also have the phenomenon which is Yes Minister, which is, believe it or not, had apparently, according to everyone in government at the time, a profound effect on their attitude coming in, because the Labour ministers did not trust the civil service at all, and thought that they were going to stab them in the back, akin to Sir Humphrey and Bernard and so on in the show. The truth of that, may well speak for itself, but I think that was probably what erred them on the side of caution in the first 3 years. But then, of course, they went absolutely mad. Absolutely mad.
Yeah, they started going increasingly bonkers. What was just remarkable was the endless amount of legislation. I mean, it just didn't seem to stop. There was just no.
I've said it once.
We've just passed this, and now we've just passed this, and we're already working on the next bill. We've just passed this Home Office bill, introducing all these new crimes, and before we've even got it through Parliament, we're already working on the next one.
Yes,
and you just go, this is ridiculous. I think there was some people saying on news programs that for several hundred years there had actually only been one bill.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. This is the thing. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. They passed more laws in the 5 years between 2000 and 2005 than had been passed in the previous 1,000 years combined.
That seems hard to believe for anyone who wasn't there, but trust me, yes. And
how many laws did Tony Blair's pass?
And they were absolutely ridiculous laws. Laws banning you from setting off atom bombs.
So this is the thing, folks. On average, during the Blair years, a new law was passed every 3 hours. Every 3 hours.
Yes. Yeah.
In his 10 years as Prime Minister, Tony Blair has introduced a new law every 3¼ hours since 1997. An average of 2,685 laws were passed every year. Every year!
No, these things are not that difficult to imagine when you were there, because you were just thought, what, not another one? Surely not. And it just kept on coming, and the longer they were in power, the more ludicrous it became. So what I mean is, you can imagine that if you are a sort of hyperactive government, then the first things you do, people will sort of say, okay, I see some sense in that, But then you need to start going looking for more things to do. I mean, you will be familiar with this concept in the Air Force, that after a while in a sort of an air campaign, you start running out of targets.
Yeah.
At the beginning, you know exactly what to bomb. You take out bridges, you take out airports, you take out communication centres. But after a while, once you've taken those things out, what do you do then? And that's the thing. Once they had done the sort of one would call the obvious things, they then started becoming ever more and more bizarre. And you were sitting there at times watching Newsnight going, I can't believe this is happening. And of course the star of Newsnight during that entire period was Jeremy Paxman. And the look on his face sometimes when yet another Labour minister was sat opposite him, trying to tell him about the sort of how imperative it is that this particular law is introduced.
Yeah,
you just looked at the face of Paxman, going, "You're familiar with that Tucker Carlson look."
Yes. Slightly,
it's all of total disbelief.
It's almost bemusement, but at the same time shock. Yes.
So with Jeremy Clark, with Jeremy Paxman, both eyebrows went up, and he would just sort of look at him as in sort of, "Are you really telling me this?"
So apparently I'm a little off with this 1,000 years thing.
I don't think it's 1,000 years, but it apparently is a very, very. I think we went through the entire era of the British Empire or whatever with passing one Home Office bill.
So it turns out that the Conservatives were rampant.
Then they started passing.
Let me finish my sentence, Britisher, for God's sake! I was just saying the Conservatives had started ramping up their bill passing as well. So, but they still increased on average per year, 22%, every year.
Well,
so there was that.
As I say,
so the reason that they did this and the how, right? Because people in chat are confused, or some are saying, how on earth did they pass so much legislation so quickly? They used a previously ignored piece of parliamentary legislation called a statutory instrument, rather than an act of parliament. So it basically bypasses the debate process by MPs and the tabling of a bill. So it allows it all to be, once the machine is going, it allows them to be passed very, very, very quickly. 98% of their new laws were brought in by statutory instruments.
And of course, they also took on the House of Lords. So basically, they reformed, in inverted commas, the House of Lords, making it therefore a much more Labour-friendly institution, allowing them to sort of get a lot of this legislation through, because a hostile House of Lords would have just basically, try to delay and stymie everything.
Lo and behold, by the way, after creating thousands of new laws on every which way, they'd create a law which mandated that if you were a coast guard in the southwest of Cornwall, that you had to have this particular manual on board. That's the kind of minutiae we're talking about here.
Yep.
And that's a real law, by the way. I mean, not the southwest of Cornwall thing, but that is a real law. They mandated these particular manuals and that sort of thing. But of course, because of the way they were measuring everything differently now, especially with a lot of these new laws, the percentage of violent crime doubled. Lo and behold,
if you create a lot more crimes, then the crime rate goes up, because suddenly things that were never illegal suddenly are illegal, and you can start arresting people for it.
No. It's worse than that. I don't think they really touched that. Even if they subdivided crimes, the overall percentage shouldn't have changed that much. But the growing complexity of just the sheer number of laws that the lawyers, the barristers and solicitors and so on were expected to learn, just ended up massively elongating the court process. And so every trial takes twice as long, it costs twice as much, and half as much work is getting done. And lo and behold, it all piles up. And there we are,
But what was so remarkable about Tony Blair was how slick he was.
Oh, he was so slick.
And how he would be able to look at a journalist asking him, why do we need this? Oh, this is just a means of streamlining the law, bringing it in accordance with international standards. It's not, so basically, there's no need to look at this in any depth. We're just doing what everybody else is doing. We're just getting rid of a British aberration in this area. And, what's your next question? Let's move on. And he was so good at that. And he really, to a certain extent, he played the media for suckers. That's if he had to. As we know today, there is media that is not really interested in giving certain politicians a hard time, and the same was the case back then.
Well,
that there would be certain journalists who would just him off.
Blair had a particular technique as well. If he knew he was coming up against a difficult interview, he would say before. This is before they really knew, I suppose. Now it's all well-established theory. But what he would say to the station is, look, we want to get through as much material as possible. So what I'm going to ask you to do is when you ask your questions, I want you to ask them 2 at a time. Because then I will have the time to think about both answers, and I'll give you an answer which is a combined answer. And so several unwitting news stations then did this for him. And of course, what happens in that case? Well, the politician gets a dual option. He can answer one question or the other, and he can pick which one is most favourable to him and spend more time on it. And that's exactly what he did. Exactly what he did.
But I must also say that what happened under Blair, and this went even further under Brown, who immediately came afterwards, was there was a certain amount of corruption of the parliamentary procedures.
Yes.
To the point... you can never turn the clock back, but to the point where if these things were investigated, if they were properly investigated, then one would be able to lock up a hell of a lot of people for lying to Parliament.
Indeed.
Outright lying. I mean, I had the joy of being part of a campaign that followed one particular bill in detail through Parliament. And we were opposing it. And that's when there was a massive wake-up call, and you just went, hang on, they can't do this. And you had sort of more old hands looking at you going, welcome to the new world. This is what they're doing all the time. And you just go, what's the point of parliamentary procedure then? So, for example, to give you an example of what I mean. So, these bills, they go through committee. So you can't expect Parliament as a whole to be scrutinising these laws in detail. So what happens is they go to the committees. The committees are made up of effectively delegates from the various parties who scrutinise it on Parliament's behalf, insist on amendments and changes, and sort of see where there are problems with this law. And if they are then content with it, they then recommend it to the House. That basically means the committee has looked at this and we think this law does what it says. It doesn't mean necessarily that the opposition politicians agree with it, but at least this isn't something that will lead to unexpected circumstances or something like that. So what tends to happen is the committee will find flaws, and they will say, okay, look, these things need to be amended. Now, that doesn't mean it then gets rejected, and then the government needs to present it back to the committee. What happens is they effectively do a deal. They say, okay, look, you amend these things, and we will recommend it to the House. But you promise to amend them, we will recommend it to the House, and then it will go to the vote in its amended form. Well, guess what? Blair didn't, this one that I had seen, it went through, it was a Blair law, but it went through under Brown. It wasn't amended. Mm-hmm. They pulled that same trick several times. So they also did it with the House of Lords.
Well, they did
Even
it.
with
They
the
did it with
Human
the
Rights Committee.
They did it with the EU Act, which because there was the whole thing about whether or not the EU would get a flag, and overwhelmingly the public said no. You're not a nation. You don't get a flag. Thank you very much, or an anthem. And then they slid it in as an amendment when they amended something else, right? So,
well, yes, but at least like that, there was some sort of, you could say that the electorate or whatever was hoodwinked or whatever, but in this case, by agreeing to amend things with the committees represent Parliament.
Yeah.
So effectively, you are lying to Parliament because the committees are now recommending to the House a law that hasn't been amended. So that's where you look at it and just go, hang on, no, surely that's criminal. Surely that's against the law. But by that time, the whole process had been that corrupted that they could get away with those things. What the situation is now, whether things have been tightened back up again, I don't know. I sure hope they have. Because if they're still running things that shoddily, whereby the government can say, oh, no, of course we're going to amend it. Of course, just sign here. No, we're going to amend it, promised.
Yeah. And
then no sooner is it signed off by the committee, they just shrug their shoulders and go, amendments? What amendments? And just present it to the House. That was ludicrous. And for those sort of things, I really think people should have gone to prison.
Yeah. There are a lot of things that I look at the moment and I go...
I mean, that was just one particular piece of legislation that I saw in detail go through the House. But some of the people who were more seasoned in these things, they looked at me and said, no, it's just, that, as you say, that many thousands of laws are passing through the House. The traffic is so relentless, nobody can keep an eye on this. And the government knew it. So they were just, they were cheating left, right, and centre. But it definitely was illegal. But yeah, what can you do? It's the way the world was, I'm afraid. So here they are talking about parliamentary democracy, celebrating the mother of all parliaments and whatever. But then they were corrupting the very processes within Parliament in order to get their laws through. Because, how shall we say, there was something sort of chest-beating about it, as in, we must get our legislation through. And it must... Any amendment to our legislation is seen as a slight. Oh, it's a weakness of ours. We've had to concede this. Whereas in reality, nobody writes a perfect law when they draft legislation. And just about every piece of legislation that goes through Parliament will be amended because, as they say, two heads are better than one. The moment you set a committee onto it who are able to call expert witnesses and whatever to advise them, then invariably they are going to find loopholes in it or oversights or something like that, and then it needs amended. The idea that should somehow be, that should lead to your pride being hurt is ridiculous. But that was the way in which the Labour and the Brown government operated. And it was pretty close to childish. But yes, because such an avalanche was going through the House, they were getting away with just murder, whereby they were just openly lying to committees and getting their legislation through unamended, almost as if they were kind of like a kid sulking that, oh no, we're not going to amend this, not if we can avoid it. And you said, well, to what avail? So you would sooner have an unamended bad piece of legislation rather than something which has been amended because someone has tried to sort of talk some sense into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was, I think like that you get a picture of just how hideous it was.
All right, Butcher. Shall we pop onto the super chats? Let's see
by all means
what we've got going
just
on.
Just as long as I don't have to sing again.
So, nobody forced you to sing the first time, old man.
Oh yes, you would say that. Suddenly we're not talking about this man standing next to me with a gun to my head.
It's a sniper across the road. But yeah, I get your point. Sitskoen says, 93 seconds late. Have you considered testing first? I mean, there's a weird... We started on time, despite me having to go and jump and grab a drink and that sort of thing. And then OBS decided that apparently it's going to give us a delay of 1.5 minutes before it gets things going.
I remember being tempted at the time to congratulate you at once again managing not to be early, not to be late, but to start dead on the second.
Precisely
I'm
on time.
at how you do it.
Precisely on time, exactly, as we always are. To be fair, as we have always been.
Punctuality to a higher level.
I mean, it is my job. It is my job. Dylan98 says, as an Irishman, I cringe at the title and completely disavow it. Also, why is the British no longer...
Irishman?
Why is the British no longer on UO? Okay, we'll get to the second part of that in a little bit. But as an Irishman, I cringe at the title and completely disavow it. Okay, Dylan. The title of this stream is Happy Birthday Northern Ireland, because I appreciate that it's taken 1 hour and 15 minutes for us to get here, but it's Northern Ireland's birthday. In fact, it is the centenary of the founding of Northern Ireland.
Well, if it's the founding of Northern Ireland, does that also mean it's the centenary of the Republic of Ireland?
I mean,
I would assume both of them must have begun at the same time.
No, because Northern Ireland would have split. I mean, let me see. Republic of Ireland birthday. Let's see what that is. Proclamation of the Irish Republic was apparently 1916, independence 1919, and their original treaty 1922. However, Northern Ireland, as an institution, as it were, has only existed since for the past 100 years, since
so does that
1921.
mean that basically for 2 years or so we didn't really know what exactly the status was of the bit that was still left over, and then eventually we kind of consecrated it into Northern Ireland?
Well, so the
sound of it,
So the Republic was one thing, and they fought around a bit, and I mean, I don't know all the details, but that seems to be it. But I figured Happy Birthday Northern Ireland. I didn't really have a title for this stream this evening. I considered a couple of things. Basically, I knew this stream was going to clash with a lot of other things. The delayed cigar stream from the Academic Agent, the several of the other
we've said what we thought about smoking, haven't we?
We have several of the other minor streamers and so on. So, and the Jolly Heretic has apparently decided that Monday evenings he must stream as well. So there's all that. And now, of course, we'll halve our watchership because they'll all go off to those ones. But it's nice to know that there'll be the loyal few who remain. That sort of thing. Northern Ireland is what is left of British Ireland, which goes back hundreds of years. Yes, so
it would still make everything a lot easier if Ireland just rejoined the Union, because like that they would be out of the EU. They would not be a problem on the Irish border, and frankly, a lot of the cultural differences that existed between Catholic Ireland and Protestant Britain much don't exist anymore these days.
Well, not on this side of the river, at least.
Well, no, I mean, you remember, blue-haired lesbians jumping up and down when abortion laws were passed in Ireland. A lot of things have happened over the last 100 years or so, where sort of insurmountable differences between the two sides have really shrunk to something where you sort of wonder, sorry, what's it all about?
Yes, we have.
Wonder, what would Ireland benefit from more? Being a member of the EU?
I know.
Separated by large Britain between it and the rest of the EU, or being a member of the United Kingdom?
Well, that is a good question. Because, of course, Ireland does benefit. If you want to consider the UK as, prior to the Brexit referendum and everything, being the kind of gateway to Europe, It's an economy which doesn't rely on the euro. It's still strong. It's obviously at the time the fifth largest economy in the world because of its ties, to its history in the empire and everything. It also has a very strong currency, whereas the euro is very weak, and it has lots of exceptions to EU laws, which other countries don't enjoy. So it's the entrance there. Then we have the Brexit referendum. Brexit comes underway, and Ireland, which has pre-existing treaties, the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1922 comes to mind, and several free movement treaties as well, which are still in effect and will continue to be in effect post full Brexit transition, if we want to call it that.
Yes, the Irish are a big exception when it comes to freedom of movement and things
Indeed.
like that. Yes.
So moving goods through Ireland actually then becomes... Ireland is not necessarily the gateway to the EU as much as it is a gateway to the UK, and it's a gateway for the UK to get back to push products into the EU with greater ease, which is again I think one of the reasons the Northern Irish backstop was considered a big deal.
I mean, one of the reasons why Ireland was so worried about this whole Brexit malarkey was because so much of their produce gets sold into the UK.
Yes.
And again, you just think, well, yeah, if you're part of the UK, where's the problem?
Well, yeah, that's certainly one position to take. The other thing with it is the Ireland has been such stagnant growth for such a long period of time. I remember when I went over there a few years ago. A friend of mine was at university, and we decided to go and visit him and see a bit of Ireland. And they were, especially the older Irish people, were gushing over the fact that it was the first time in something like 20 years that they'd seen cranes building new infrastructure. So new buildings or roads or whatever it happened to be. And they attribute that in some way, shape or form to their growing economy. And as we know, a growing economy, like, people become very, very cautious with the growing economy. So I don't expect Ireland to be, like, even considering anything... the Republic of Ireland, this is. I don't expect them to be considering anything approximating reunification when they've got money now pouring into them as a kind of quasi-tax haven in this interim period where nobody really knows what's happening, right?
Well, I still say it would be the solution to all their problems. Things like that, the Catholics would get their reunification with the Republic of Ireland, just the other way round.
You reckon?
Yes, I really think that it's. If you look at it since Brexit, it's really,
I mean, Ireland is really benefiting at the moment from all of the kind of mire surrounding Brexit at the moment.
In what way do you think it's benefiting from having had Brexit?
Panicking businesses are moving their head offices to Ireland. And including, cautious businesses as well. There was that whole moment when Jacob Rees-Mogg was questioned about why his finance firm had moved its head office to Ireland, for instance. But they're not the only one. And the EU is looking at Ireland with some scrutiny now, and trying to make it an appealing place. They're trying to get them on the side, and so they're pouring money in various ways. The European City of Culture was in Ireland last year, for instance, and that sort of thing. So it's seeing dividends, as it were, from effectively being relatively neutral.
Well, I mean, we'll see. I would say they've been pretty much in a malaise, as you say, ever since the credit crunch, when you had entire villages that had been built, in expectation of crazy sales because the property market was so booming over there. you know, I've heard of sort of situations where you have one or two houses having actually been sold, and then the rest just went broke. So you've got one or two people living in a settlement in which there is nobody else.
I mean,
So I don't know to what extent that has resolved itself yet. I doubt it will have done.
I mean, it's not what I saw when I was over there, but I appreciate I didn't see all of Ireland.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of property development that just went pop
Belly up.
during the credit crunch, brutally so.
Okay.
Ireland was one of the most hard hit countries in the credit crunch. I mean, do you remember Portugal? I think needed some help and needed bailing out. I think Ireland was very much in a sort of a similar position, that if all your property developers suddenly go bust or on the brink, and you're the banks, you're in some serious trouble. And I mean, that was what Alex Salmon was always going on about, wasn't it? The arc of prosperity, and Ireland was part of that. And of course, Ireland went pop, and the oil price went with it. So Alex Salmon's arc of prosperity suddenly was non-existent. But I still say in the long term, I really don't see the point of an English-speaking nation separated from the rest of the United Kingdom when, yes, it is its main market.
Well,
and at the same time, you've got all these troubles with the border, and you just think, well, yes, in that case, if you just reunite the whole thing, and just look at the last 100 years as an aberration, everything's solved.
Everything's solved. There you go. You heard it here, fresh from the horse's mouth. The Britisher is a horse. That's now apparently law canon. There you go. But there you go. The Britisher is a firm proponent of reunification, and
it's called the British Isles. Just look in an atlas.
I don't mind. I mean, I'm not opposed to reunification. I just don't think that they're going to go for that.
Neither do I. I think no administration votes itself out of existence. But that doesn't mean that it wouldn't actually be a solution to everything.
By the way, speaking of people voting themselves out of existence, have you heard about the French recently?
The French
in the last week, a really big piece of news in France in the last week.
Well, a big piece of news. I'm assuming you're referring to that letter by the generals.
I am, which is like the politest the French have ever been, which just makes me.
I'm not sure it's that big a piece of news.
No. To me,
it's news, but I don't think it's quite as earth-shattering as some people are trying to make out.
Well, it's like the French poll their population quite a lot, and quite contrary to a lot of our polls, the polls usually favour the opposition to the government, whereas over here they favour obviously that. So you'll have remembered this with the Gilets jaunes over the course of the last couple of years, the yellow jackets and the various riots that went on over that. The rising fuel tariffs and that sort of thing, which then obviously segmented into many different crusades and then eventually fell flat. But including there were the black jackets, the gilets noirs at one point. But is it noir? Is noir French?
Noir is black. Yes.
Yes, I thought so. I was, I'm going neuf in my head, and then I'm like, no, that's 9.
Neuf, no, that's new. Bon neuf.
Yeah.
The new bridge.
So and I've embarrassed myself now even without. Anyway, the Gilets jaunes there, and they were 75%, I think, in one of the national polls were in favour of the Gilets jaunes cause or something like that, and quite similarly, the Macron has been bringing in new laws and new ways of dealing with things in France to curb the rampant rise of Islamic terror attacks. Something like over 1,000 a year, they're getting at the moment. So is pretty horrific. Most of them are church-based attacks, and they'd had something like 815 or something church attacks in the past 5 years or so.
I would caution that we don't necessarily know that those are terror attacks.
Okay, yes, that's fine, but in any case, they're reporting. Then we'll say that we'll caveat they are reporting that there were over 800 damages on church property. There you go. We've taken the middle ground there, Bridger. And of course Macron, facing broader calls to strengthen France against Islamic terror, has passed this law, for instance, especially in the wake of the beheading of that teacher, which was tragic.
Yeah.
That. Especially, that whole case.
There's just been an attack, hasn't there, last week or two on a policewoman where she was stabbed in the neck, I believe.
Yeah, and there's that and that sort of thing. I mean, we've had stuff like that over here. There's a video which has resurfaced recently, which some people are trying to make out is very recent, but I think I saw a couple of years ago, of a police officer on a moped being effectively pulled off his moped and then having his head kicked in the street, that sort of thing, and in a very British way, and I hate to laugh, but in a very British way, he's going, "What are you doing?" Like, they're stamping on his head in his helmet. Thank goodness he was.
Excuse me.
Like, how dare you? This is Britain. This doesn't happen here. So yeah, that. Macron, France, trying to curb that. I think it's something like, if you complain now, if you're of foreign descent and you complain about pictures or cartoons being discussed in class, you'll be deported. Like that, there's a zero tolerance policy there, which has Lotus Eaters and so on going, based France and all the rest. But quite where I was going with all of this, I'm not entirely sure. What were we talking about before we got on?
Yeah, I think you wanted to take us on to the story of the letter by the generals.
Oh, yes, okay.
Then I sort of said, I'm not sure if it's that big.
Thank you.
And then you started elaborating a bit.
Okay, yes. Thank you, British. Where would I be without you, my man? So then you have this letter by the generals. Macron has introduced all these new laws. The generals have penned a letter. They're all retired, which is also important to note. So none of them are serving currently, and it's about 30 of them. And they threaten a coup if Macron does not come down harder on the Islamic terrorist threat.
Well, do they actually threaten a coup, or is it sort of is it sort of interpreted into the language? Do they actually say, and if this does not happen, we will take over the country?
Let me have a look. Let me see. French.
Do they actually say, we will rebel?
Letter.
Because I'm not sure they say that.
Anger as ex-generals. Okay. 1,000 servicemen and women, including 20 retired generals, put their names to an open letter, that claimed the country was heading for civil war due to religious extremism. Ministers have condemned the message published in a right-wing magazine. The letter was first published on the 60th anniversary of a failed coup d'etat. The hour is grave, France is in peril, the signatories said. Far-right leader Marine Le Pen has spoken out in support of the letter, but the minister in charge of the armed forces said that they are going to be neutral and loyal. And that signatories still serving in the military would be punished for defying a law which requires them to remain politically neutral. What does the letter say? Here we go. It warns Emmanuel Macron, his government and MPs of several deadly dangers threatening France, including Islamism and hordes of the banlieue, the impoverished immigrant suburbs surrounding cities. The signatories go on to blame a certain anti-racism for splitting up communities, seeking to create racial war by attacking statues and French history, accused the government of using the police as proxy agents and scapegoats and by repressing the Gilets jaunes. And they're saying, it is no longer the time to procrastinate. Otherwise, tomorrow, civil war will put an end to this growing chaos and death, for which you will be responsible, with numbers in the thousands. So, like, it's clearly penned in a
dire warning. They're not saying,
but,
or else we will take over the country.
Not that I would expect that the French would do that anyway. I think if they were going to try and take over the country, if there was going to be an insurrection, they would just march down the street and that would happen. You know, like.
Well, yes, but you understand what I mean. That nobody is threatening a coup. When it comes to this, you always have to understand that they will have quite a few generals, but most of them, just by the nature of it, will have a certain political outlook. I don't think there are many socialist French generals.
No, I don't.
Do you understand what I mean? So you have got generals who are naturally of the political right, basically saying what the political right thinks. And to me, I'm not really sure that constitutes that big a news. I know it sounds stark and whatever, because, in France, politics sounds a bit more stark. It's, the nature of discourse is a bit more feisty. But what have we that actually tells us that this needs to be taken seriously? That this is really, the military indirectly speaking to the government, officially saying something has to be done, or else there's going to be civil war, and you know full well on which side we're going to be.
No.
I'm not sure whether one hasn't overinterpreted.
I don't even think it's that. Okay, so there's the element which is like they're playing up the generals thing anyway, but it seems to be a statement of worry by servicemen and women, both retired and active. Then, of course, it's been blown into a particular context by the media and the government, and this is then going to fall on the heads of serving servicemen and women. But I look at it because, like as I said, the French, if they were going to do a coup, would not send a nice letter before doing so, right? They didn't send.
It's an attempt to exert political influence, rather than some sort of warning of imminent action.
But I think that it is important to note that it is France, how large is France's military? How large is France's military? France is 426,000, okay. With an active being around 370,000. And then they have the Air and Space Force. So it's like 350,000, okay, and that's not a small number, but you have to take into account that only 1,000 people have signed this open letter, although you have to again then take into account the fact that you need people who are engaged enough to want to sign it and to have read it and to then agree with it and then to sign it. So I think that it's important that the French government takes it seriously as a we need to not let off on this issue, as it were. That's the main takeaway I get from it. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean, but in that regard, this is what I mean. It's not that much of a statement other than a restatement of what we already know. Do you understand where I'm going here?
Yeah, when the civil war comes next month, you'll eat those words, of course. But until then,
I mean, we're all constantly eating our words of things we said 18 months ago, and so
surely not.
As such, I mean, how many people were, how many people were telling us that Joe Biden would not be president. But
Well, we
when it
disagree
comes,
on why that is, but yeah.
oh well, no, I mean, I recall even after the result being declared, there were people stating quite clearly that Joe Biden was not going to be in the White House. But there you go. When it comes to France, yes, I mean, things are somewhat more serious than they are in Britain, or should we say they're different than in Britain?
I mean, there's we have to
it seems to be worse over there, but to a certain extent, the nature of discourse is more sort of contrarian over there,
more feisty.
Whereas over here, is there a Charlie Hebdo over here?
We have to balance the fact that France is rowdier than us,
yes,
in general, with the fact that they're also closer to the quote unquote action than we are, and so as I say, like, I view France as kind of, I've said this before again, I see France as kind of the dark horse of Europe. A lot of people look at Germany in terms of determining the direction that Europe will go, as they see the EU as a kind of extension of the German project, and people also look at the UK as kind of a not a mascot. That was the word I'm looking for. Like an icon where other European nations will look to the UK and basically see it and see how it does out of Brexit. What are its trials? What are its tribulations? What are its successes and victories? And then where will it go? And I look at France and I say, well, actually, one of the big reasons that the EU as an institution exists, as an economic area in the first place, was to prevent the French and the Germans going to war for a third time, right? It was to marry them up together closely enough that they could, coexist in some kind of equilibrium, and hopefully, I mean, largely I would say that's been successful, right? But I look at France as a much greater representation of what continental thought is than I do Germany or ourselves.
Well, I recall someone, I don't know where I heard this. I remember someone once saying, it seemed a very insightful observation, the more I thought of it, that in the Middle East, you have got various countries, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and they can be very powerful, Turkey, but that person sort of said the heart of the Middle East, the cultural heart, lies in Egypt and in Syria.
Right.
Those are the two countries that you kind of have to watch. And therefore, the very fact that it then happened in Syria, that Syria kind of tore itself apart in that civil war, was kind of very telling, that there were sort of mad dogs loose in the very cultural heart of the Middle East. What is also worth considering there with Egypt is, how we are sort of talking about the gradual fundamentalization of Islam in the Middle East. Well, it started in Egypt. And these things are kind of worth remembering. As you say, sort of, where is the sort of political heartland of a particular region? And France, I would agree with you, is definitely one of those countries, one of the key countries in Europe. If I would have to pick two in Europe, I would not pick Germany and France.
Okay.
Those are the obvious, they're just the powerful ones. I would pick Italy and France, as those are the weather vanes. And both of those countries are kind of getting uppity with the EU, and generally are beginning to sort of bump against the, how do we say, sort of business as usual sentiment of the EU. Both for differing reasons, but you can see that they are kind of they're getting restless,
Yeah.
and that they want some sort of change. That they want some sort of new political settlement to take place.
Well,
A new paradigm. And
Italy is constantly trying new paradigms in that case.
well, I mean, I remember a time when Italy had more governments than there had been years since the Second World War. I don't know where they are now.
No, they're still in that place. They rarely
they're still
last.
in that.
They
They're
rarely,
still in that, are they?
Rarely
I mean,
last more,
Berlusconi, in that regard, was a political success story, the likes of which you couldn't imagine. I mean, he went on for years.
Yeah.
Given that on average, a government in Italy didn't last 12 months, one has to take one's hat off to the man. He was oft belittled by a lot of people, but you have to admit that in such a political environment, to be able to survive for that length of time shows that you've got some sort of nous. But yes, I would say on the continent of Europe, look to France and Italy and see which way the wind blows. And I think it's fair to say that the wind has been distinctly blowing in one direction. And it seems to generally be the course of travel on the entire continent. I know you have, swings and roundabouts, but generally you have a sort of feel that it's going one way, that this is the kind of reaction, belatedly, gradual reaction to what has been a period of absolute mass immigration, and particular immigration of culturally alien populations. And now comes the grand reaction. Now we see how this, what the reaction to it is. And I think, yes, one is seeing it in France and in Italy distinctly happening, but we're also seeing it in Holland, we're seeing it in Germany, we're seeing it in Austria. Strangely, we're also seeing it in Eastern Europe, where there hasn't really been that much immigration. So they're almost reacting to something they're observing rather than something that's happening within their own boundaries, if you know what I mean.
Well, it might be a question of tolerances. So, like, Eastern Europe is always like one of the reasons they've seen less immigration is they're more anti-immigration anyway, especially given a lot of them are former communist regimes.
Well, they're also not. They are also the areas in Europe that are receiving all the economic aid from the European Union because they're not as wealthy as the other countries. So France and Germany are much wealthier than than these Eastern European countries. So that's where the immigrants head. They head to the wealthy places.
But also because the immigrants are heading to the wealthy places, the EU then tries to put conditions on the aid. I believe, like Poland, for instance,
yes,
they tried to say, your aid will stop unless you provide this. At which point Poland said, "Well, we're going to sue Germany for damages in excess of $100 trillion for what you did to us in the Second World War." At which point those conditions went away, and then they dropped the charges.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because Italy plays a part in this whole thing. So Italy is one of those countries that is seeing a lot of ingress of immigrants.
Yeah.
Because they just happen to be on the front line.
So
they get a lot of these people from Libya.
And not to mention they just are almost entirely coastline.
Yes.
But it's funny given how much they hate outsiders.
So they are looking at the rest of Europe saying, well, what about all this European brotherhood and whatever? We are being swamped here. Yeah. Can we please offload some of these immigrants on you? Because we're being stuck with them. We can't send them home. What are we supposed to do?
We're the middle stop between Greece and France, and then a lot of them are finding when they get here that actually they don't want to make more of a journey.
Yes, so they are looking at it and they are putting pressure on the EU, and the EU are realizing that the temperature is rising in Italy, and they're sort of saying, okay, look, we need to alleviate this, if only for the sake of, political convenience. So everybody should take some. Everybody should take some of these immigrants, in inverted commas, refugees, and the Poles and the Hungarians in particular, they are just digging their heels in and go, no, why? Why should we take these? So Italy is continuing to push, and Hungary and Poland are pushing in the opposite direction. And, well, at some point, something's got to give. Now, I cannot see the Poles and the Hungarians ever accepting any. And as long as they don't accept any, well, why should any of the other countries accept them? So you've got this situation whereby the Italians are looking at the others going, look, we're having to pick these people up in ships that are unseaworthy, these blow-up dinghies, and we have to rescue them close to an island of ours that is pretty close to the Libyan mainland, because otherwise they're all going to drown. So we can't, in all good conscience, allow all these people to drown, but frankly, we can't just keep taking them in.
Indeed.
So you've got people sort of camping in Rome and whatever with nowhere to go, and you've seen pictures of LA and whatever looking more and more miserable. Well, similar things are happening in places in Italy, and the Italians just don't understand why they ought to accept this.
Yes, I went to Rome in 2017. I mean, I went to a lot of other places in Italy as well. I walked down the entire west coast. But I went to Rome, and one of the big things the Italians there were saying to me, they said, it's a shame, but, you can't walk through any of the public paths anymore that you could last year, because they're all filled with homeless immigrants who are living there because there are free water fountains in those parks, so they know they can get access to water. And there's just rubbish everywhere. And it was just not safe, and you wouldn't go in certain places after dark. It was horrific. Yeah.
And in all fairness, even if Italy were independent of the EU, one couldn't see that ending.
No.
So it does seem to be it does seem to be a specific problem to Italy.
I mean, maybe,
but it is creating a lot of differences with the EU, and you can see that there are two forces pushing in opposite directions, and at some point this is going to break.
Well, I mean, if Italy wasn't part of the EU and the immigrants were still coming, Italy would probably just shoot the immigrants on sight. So
I honestly don't think they would. Because, I mean, right now they could simply let them drown, and they're not letting them drown. I mean, I remember at some point there was even the EU was paying for some of the patrolling, and then the EU decided to stop the patrolling, saying, well, it only encourages them. And the Italian Navy just said, we can't do this.
Yeah.
We simply cannot be within radio hailing distance, and not go to people's help who are drowning. It's just, I'm sorry, we just can't do it.
It's antithetical to the Italian idea, if you want to call it that.
Well, I think it's antithetical pretty much to anybody who's at sea.
The human idea.
I mean, even in war, the sailors will try and torpedo each other's ships, but then once the ship goes down, they'll try and save them.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to abandon other people to the sea.
It's a horrific way to die, yes.
And that's the conundrum here, and that's what the traffickers are playing.
Well, of course,
they know full well that they are the bastards who are abandoning these people at sea.
You've got the point of view of the kind of the extreme anti-lot, which is just let them drown. Like if enough of them drown, it'll be enough of a disincentive that they will stop coming.
For those people, I would simply put the challenge: okay, you go and watch them drown. See how long you last.
Trust me, as someone who's been in the military, I mean, you claim you seem to act like that's a difficult challenge, but depending on the context, you can dehumanize your opponent enough that it's just not going to happen.
You can dehumanize an opponent who wants to wants to do you harm.
No, but you could.
But I'm not sure you can dehumanize a woman with her child drowning in the sea. That's where I just think it's.
I mean, sure, but it's 99% men of working age. So,
yes, I know, but nonetheless, I really think
my point is
you have a massive problem.
My point is you saying you saying the let them drown crowd. The people who've done that in large part have made their. I don't know. If I was part of that crowd and I walk the line because I don't want to see people drown, but I want to sink the boats and return people to where they came from on the other shore, and eventually there will be no more boats for them to send, however unseaworthy. Right?
I think we all agree that we want to return them.
Right, but there's the other part of me which says a few deaths here and there, making it seem more dangerous. Although, it all comes down to whether or not we have an accurate representation of motivation. Because the idea is that there's a motivation which is, they look at the West as, literally paradise on earth. Documentaries like Lauren Southern's, I can't remember the name of the documentary. She did, Borderless, I think it was called. And she did a series of interviews with people who are looking to come, and a lot of them have very unrealistic expectations, and they're like, I'm going to be a footballer, and they're like 35 or something, and it's very sad. And and then you get to the other side where she's interviewing people in Calais who are stuck in these effectively favelas, and they're saying I wish I'd stayed in Pakistan or whatever. This is horrific. This is not what I imagined at all. I was sold. I was sold a lie.
There was,
so it's a question of these people are literally being sold all of their earthly desires, from their career aspirations to their monetary issues to their health to their family to their protection, will be solved if they can get to the West. And I don't think even death will prevent that bit. They know it's dangerous, they know they're giving up everything. I don't think that's a message, even a message that powerful. Even if we were shooting them as they came across, not just letting the boats fail or whatever, but actively there was a patrol boat going out and sniping immigrants as they came across, I do not think that would even be a powerful enough message to stop them, because they are sold that it's almost like a dystopian nightmare, from some kind of. I mean, I bring up the Hunger Games, which I know you haven't read or watched. As an example, right? It's this idea of a capital city which is incredibly wealthy, where everybody lives, the high life and could afford to dress themselves in insane colours and wear lots of makeup. And then you have the districts outside, which are, poor and impoverished and supply things to the capital, but don't see any dividends. And I think that kind of vision is being sold to these people, and they are either desperate enough, or it's just a simple matter of incentives. Why would you not choose to go to paradise on earth if you could, right? So,
well, I think you touch upon something which, I remember I touched on the video that I may have deleted it long ago, I don't remember, where you sort of ask yourself, is our own media in the West sort of overselling the West?
There's definitely that case.
One thing that sort of strikes me is that in a lot of media, particularly American media, everybody is middle class.
Yeah.
And you sort of wonder, where has the working class gone in all this? Where are the, I don't know, sort of gig economy careers or whatever in TV series and things like that?
You make a really good point. You make a really good point. Where is what's his face? Eddie Murphy's character in is it Trading Places? No.
Trading Places.
Yeah, where he goes and he becomes the leader of a. That's funny. But like loads of these things. I mean, like even if you take someone like Rocky and that sort of thing. He's a down and out kind of working class bloke. Loads of Mel Gibson films kind of portrayed the working class kind of guy. Like even the detectives and the police officers in the Baltimore area and that sort of thing, and they're all kind of rough street guys almost. But we don't have that anymore. Like nobody.
I mean, nowadays, if you get someone who's supposed to be, even if they're supposed to be a hard-up character or whatever, they still nonetheless live in a flat that looks, it's got 4 bedrooms and.
Or here's the other thing. Or usually, if they want to portray the working class, they'll usually take the ethnic minority angle. And if they do that, they massively emphasize, like the richness of the cultural angle, right? There's no suffering in that sort of thing, or if there is suffering, it's all kind of mitigated, I suppose, by the richness of the culture.
Think just sort of the way they illustrate things. So take a police station or something like that. A police station really looks like any other sort of public office by and large. Neon lighting on the ceiling, stuff like that. But if you see a police station in a new police series or whatever, it's all sort of high-tech glass and chrome and high design and whatever, and you just go, I'm sorry, but this is ludicrous.
My sister works for the military, for the police, and we can certainly agree that it is a lot of black plastic, blue felt, and old buildings. Yes.
But this is not the image of it. This is not the image of itself that the West is pumping out in its media output that is going to the rest of the world. So you have to understand that these people in Africa and in the Middle East, they are, or also in Latin America, they are seeing the output from North America and from Europe, where everybody lives in a glass palace.
It's a massive
even
propaganda.
A struggling actor has got a penthouse apartment and drives a Ferrari.
And that's
that sort of thing.
And that's not even to speak of the kind of targeted advertising, which comes in the form of, like, Sadiq Khan did a huge thing. I can't remember how many millions it cost, but he did a huge advertising campaign called London is Open. Germany, I know, like, as a country, did a similar thing, which is again why they were one of the primary recipients of migrants. They built entire towns.
Did you hear about, I'm sorry if I'm digressing, but did you hear about Sadiq Khan's menopause policy?
No, what's this?
Oh yes, he announced it on Twitter. He made a political announcement.
If
he is re-elected again, he will have an official menopause policy.
Right.
And you just, what? So basically you sort of do a double take going...
Is his policy that it exists?
So what he is introducing is, on re-election, he will make sure that any woman who works for City Hall, if this means transport for London, I don't know, but anything more than likely under his control.
Yeah.
Any woman who suffers symptoms of menopause or whatever, will possibly have flexible hours offered to her, will even get time off if the symptoms are bad.
So
you'll
this will
be his official menopause policy.
You'll get menopause leave.
You couldn't have just decided that in a personnel meeting. No, you needed to announce this in an election campaign as a policy, did you?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. It's funny as well, isn't it? Given that the vast majority of Sadiq Khan's voters aren't in work anyway, right? So, like, or not in the women aren't, certainly, right? So it's a curious attempt to grab, I suppose, the left leaning female vote, right?
I would really,
Do you know what?
really
Even
like to see the back of that man.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
quite sure he'll be re-elected, but good God, would I like to see the back of that
Well,
man.
what is it like? His greatest competitor is Sean Bailey, and I just there's it's not even it's not a 2-horse race. I mean, it's not even a like Sean Bailey basically has marketed his campaign on like the whole knife crime thing. So he would say, like he's got this piece of the BBC. Let me just see if I put it up here. There we go. The Conservative candidate for Mayor of London has not had a traditional route into politics. On the day he was first asked to stand to be a Conservative MP, Sean Bailey had a fight in a car park with a drug dealer. Yeah, boy, Sean Bailey is your man on the street. He was a former youth worker who explained that he was trying to sell drugs to one of my young people, and I had to step in. It feels like an episode of Ross Kemp. Although with a bit more balls, I suppose. He has dozens of stories like this, but dealing with this kind of violence seems to help put the combative world of politics into perspective. If you come from where I come from and you've seen people stabbed to death, then you can ride the political barbs they throw at you. And I'm like, I'm sure, like, he's got that sort of thing, but like, to me, this whole thing reeks of the spin around, like, Sadiq Khan's mishandling of knife crime.
Yeah.
As well as anything else, like, but it's so transparent as well. I mean, like, in terms of the racial vote and that sort of thing, like, he's a black guy. Sadiq Khan is obviously a Muslim and of is he Pakistani descent? I can't remember.
I think Khan is Pakistani descent.
Yeah. So like they're playing to two different racial audiences as well. But Sadiq Khan has the kind of monopoly on it because like he gets all the Asiatic nations around there anyway, and the religious vote, whereas Sean Bailey doesn't. But yeah, like Sadiq Khan, I would love to see the back of, but he's not going anywhere, folks. I'm sorry to break you.
No,
and
I agree.
certainly,
I think he's.
I'm speaking to the chat.
Staying there, but my God, would I like to see the back of him? And it really is one of those things where you just. It's a deep felt desire to see the back of Sadiq Khan.
Yeah, and then there's and all of people kind of going, oh, maybe Lawrence Fox has an idea. Like, no, an independent candidate like Lawrence Fox, and I call him an independent because his party is virtually nothing. Like, especially given that the man has the charisma of a damp rag, is just not going anywhere, folks. I'm sorry.
I think in the right moment he has got charisma. I just don't think. I don't think he's
disagree.
Experienced enough a political player to kind of understand how things get interpreted and how things get presented and so on.
There's the one angle, which is what you just said, where like as soon as he comes under scrutiny, his political positions kind of fall apart in their implementation, whereas experienced politicians are very good at deflecting that sort of thing, even if they don't have as much of an idea. They have as little of an idea in terms of implementation as he does. But he's more likely to be honest, which causes issues for his campaign.
Yeah.
I mean, and secondly, there's the issue of like I genuinely. When I say I don't think he's that charismatic, I think he's not. I think his moment on BBC Question Time was a relief to a lot of people who just wanted someone to emphatically just say, I've had enough. And he did, but he's still like the relief from that is short-lived, and he is in no way suited to being a spokesperson for anything, like as far as I can tell anyway. Like, just a middle tier actor who felt strongly politically about this thing and has tried to make something of it, and even released an album where he sang about it.
Well, yes, but those things are always unwise.
But like, I look at it and I go, I have yet to see the spark. I have yet to see the spark which kept Farage, for instance, despite his unrelenting unpopularity, nationwide. And I hate to say that, because like people will turn to me and say, well, Farage was actually very popular with the local people and the working class and that sort of thing. I'm sorry, but like he wasn't. Like general opinion of Farage, unless you were very politically active, was and explored his political positions, was very unfavourable. I mean, like, there's a reason UKIP only scored 15% in the polls, and
I would put it like this.
But the man was
it's the
charismatic.
subject matter.
Okay.
And I say this as somebody who has been banging on about free speech for longer than he can remember. And it seemed much easier for Farage. I'm not saying that Farage didn't have a challenge. I still say Farage is more than likely the politician of this generation. But with his subject, there was something in which there was a sort of strong gut feeling that people sort of felt viscerally about their nation. One of the problems that I think has been at the heart of the problem with defending free speech is that everybody likes to kind of, oh, well, no, I'm all for free speech. But that's really where it ends. It's very, very difficult to mobilize that sort of
100%
gut resentment.
100%. I don't think that free speech is like, you need something more, especially over here. People would look at it and go, well, maybe we can raise the fervour that the Americans have for their free speech amendment, right? But it is just not the case that is a thing over here. And you see that with platforms all the time. I mean, aside from them being targeted by their competitors, I mean, like, let's bring up Parler, which had a clear conservative slant. It was targeted. It was removed from, like, servers wouldn't host them, payment processors wouldn't allow them to use them, and that sort of thing. There was a clear targeting campaign, but even and that was because it had some popularity. But Parler had free speech as a thing, but it wasn't the whole thing. Whereas sites like Gab, like Gab, like Minds, and what's the other big? I say big. What's the other one which is like alt media style? Not Odyssey. BitChute, maybe. Like, they all market themselves on free speech, and I go, but that's like, that's not. To the end user, to the like, you might be appealing to a small subset of the political crowd, but in terms of mass adoption, fuck all. The end user experience has got to be targeted towards the normies, and you've somehow got to make free speech palatable to them, despite all the propaganda being thrown at them, and that just doesn't work. It's one of the reasons why. I mean, aside from all the other issues going on with him, Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin's free speech platform never got off the ground, right? Like, who cares about free speech? Like, most people are too busy working. Like, they don't have enough time for it. I looked at I put out a tweet this morning, which you saw because you responded to it with a clip from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, of all things.
I totally disavow. I have no idea what you're talking about. No, of course, I responded with up from the ashes grow the roses of success.
So I looked at this morning. I felt very professional. I got up at 7. I had breakfast at 7:30 and looked at the TV. And put on BBC Breakfast because, like, it was an interesting experiment for me. I wanted to see what someone who isn't politically engaged, who just gets half an hour of BBC in the morning and BBC in the evening, or Sky in the evening, or whatever, gets, and it was dire, if I'm honest. But I looked at it and I went, like, those are the people. That is the majority of people. Like, they are just not that interested. I mean, like, maybe for some stuff, like a particular niche subject that they want to talk about down the pub with their mates, but in general, the average person gets their news this morning would have been there's a chap who jumped in the Thames to save a woman's life and he died, along with another chap who saved a woman's life. That's very sad. You know, that one life had to be traded for another there. And there's a second thing, which is that, you know, music, I guess, is and the festival scene is opening up slowly with regards to COVID. That was all that you could glean in that half an hour, aside from the weather. So that's the news that you get, and that's as much influence as you get. There's it's like it's a different world out there for anyone who isn't interested or engaged with politics. It's completely different. Their concerns are completely different. You know what I mean? Anyway,
I know what you mean, but I think when it comes to that sort of anti-free speech monkey on your back, and with the sort of continual encroachment of training courses at work and things like that, I think it's beginning to hit home.
I think the training courses at work thing is definitely starting to hit. And I hear a lot of things. I mean, several people have said to me things like, but it feels like it's delayed by a couple of years. So it's like nobody I know typically in this day and age is having the feminism debate, right? And yet, like either, people have either made their decision on which side of the river they fall on that one, or they're just not interested. But quite a lot of normies that I know will preface certain statements. They'll say, well, I'm not a feminist, but, or I am a feminist, but, and that sort of thing. And I go, really? You're still making these statements, and it's 2021? Whereas,
well, I mean, there is sort of a saying in political campaigning and whatever, that by the time you are sick of saying something, much of your audience is only just beginning to hear it. I mean, that's why you get these sort of slogans by politicians. What was it? Strong and stable government by Theresa May.
Yeah.
To the point where you just went, oh, please shut up, love. Strong and stable government. And yes, it's this mantra in political campaigning that by the time you just don't want to hear yourself speak anymore, they are only just beginning to hear you. And I think that is very much sort of an example of that things that by now a lot of people sort of regard as sort of old herring are only really just in the mainstream beginning to sort of hit home. But it would suggest that, 2 or 3 years from now, some of the things we're talking about now will more than likely begin hitting home.
Maybe.
Because, I really don't think that people will just continue to swallow it. At some point, I think there will be an up with this we will not put. And to all people out there who immediately, oh yes, civil war and this, no. They just vote in a government who basically tells them, yeah, we're going to get rid of it. It's interesting. We came here we got here talking about, Good Morning, the BBC.
Yeah.
Later today, I saw something. Later in the day, I then saw something around about noon. I think it's called something like Global Reaction or something like that, and it's on BBC News, on the BBC News channel. And it's obviously one of their ways of sort of trying to be a bit more like the internet, where they've got about 6 or 9 people coming in on Zoom calls or whatever, and then they've got 2 other guests who are also on a Zoom call, and then questions get put to them. And what was interesting is one of them was Opal Tometi, who, of course, is one of the 3 heroines who founded Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And her counterpart was some chap of whom I've never heard before. What is it? Dwayne Brooks.
Dwayne Dibley, gotcha.
He seems to be, a Tory, a black Tory. He's got an OBE, don't ask me how. He seems very young for anybody to have an honour, but there you go. Yeah. But, yeah, once in a while, they sort of cross swords. And it was interesting because, of course, the BBC presenter, again, black, immediately always, shielded Opal Tometi. Let's move on. Let's take another question. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there was, one moment, for example, where he just went, "Well, you say you've achieved this. So what have you achieved?" "Oh well, I mean, the movement. No, not the movement, not politics, not the." For black people in the street, what have you actually done for them? "Oh, we've done so much. Cheesy smile, Kamala Harris. Wait, come and save her, if you know what
Yeah.
I mean." But yes, he actually did kind of once or twice really sort of go, "Okay, then come on, what have you done?" And you can see that their currency is beginning to run out. I think particularly the revelations of the other one of the three who now has a property portfolio of $3.1 million hasn't gone down very well. He was straight up saying, as far as I'm concerned, you lot are all just in it for the money. You're just basically telling some people who are in desperate straits that all their problems are down to race and that it's down to some system that's against them. And effectively you're telling these people what they want to hear, and you're doing it for remuneration. "Oh no. You could sort of. She didn't know how to respond to this guy.
No,
because he
of
was
course
black.
she didn't.
It's
like,
a white guy. We all know exactly what the response would have been.
Of course, but I'm reminded of that interview with the BLM protesters who went on what's his face, Jesse Peterson's show. Jesse Peterson,
Yeah.
and they just said,
Can't say I do.
Well, Jesse Peterson is a black. I mean, he's not the smartest guy, but he's a podcast host in America, very popular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In fact, let me just. He's on YouTube primarily. Jesse Lee Peterson, he born 1949, American so-called far-right talk show host and president of the Brotherhood Organization of a New Destiny. Right? Okay, that's fine. But he is. If I put it here, Jesse Peterson. His podcast has 300,000 subscribers and that sort of thing. Anyway, so BLM.
So tiny in comparison to us.
Yeah, of course. Anyway, so a BLM protester went on his thing, and she went, "Do you think you're oppressed?" And he went, "No." And they had no idea how to respond. They were like, "But you can see that what the evil white man has done to you." And he's like, "I really can't. You're going to have to make me see this." And she walked off the set. Genuinely didn't know. Jesse Lee Peterson. Yes. I don't rate the guy at all, but just in terms of his blunt manner,
it was sort of a golden moment of basically someone being blunt with them and saying, "No, so you'll have to explain it."
It was because he's because he's not the most intelligent chap. But it does mean that he can ask the simple questions. He's not trying to be clever. He will ask the basics, and if they fall down on the basics, they really get caught out.
Yeah. But no, it was interesting to see in this program that somebody just basically who's black, who therefore can't just be accused of racism, can openly resisting and saying, no, I'm not buying this. You're just in this for the money.
Yeah.
And and she didn't quite know how to deal with it at times. So she did the sort of usual, academic bluster that we get from these people. But as such, I don't think it was because I was biased and rooting for him, if you know what I mean. It really did seem that here was a completely novel experience, and that then the presenter would kind of, let's take another question, as in, quick.
Yeah.
Whereas I think
move on.
If it would have been someone like Jeremy Paxman, who was famous for those moments, he would have just sat there and gone, in your own time, and just enjoyed the pregnant pause in which someone was desperately trying to think of something to say. Because yes, he did stump her at times, and she kind of blathered, but then ran out of fuel, and then what do you do? And he's still looking at her, going, "So have you got an example?"
Yeah.
And you sort of feel, particularly since these stories have emerged with all these houses, when it seems quite clear that at least one of the three is now a multimillionaire, and you look at her with her bleached teeth, and you just go, yeah, you've had a bit of work done too, haven't you? More than likely you've got money to spend, compared to the fact that you're supposed to be, representing the completely disowned and poverty-stricken masses in the streets.
Yes, how many black,
doesn't-
not how many black people has your movement helped? How many black people have you personally helped? Using the funds that you got for your 4 houses or whatever.
But it really is. It was sort of one of those things where you can sort of see that now a black person like that seems to have much more ammunition to go at someone like that. So something has changed there. Because yes, there are certain subjects, and they have been one of those things where they've exploited that ability to. Oh, it's all about fairness. It's all about equality. It's all about this. That famous Mott and Bailey technique.
Yes.
Oh, we want this. We want that. We want the other. And then you just go, well, but what has that got to do with anything? And then immediately withdraw back to the Mott and go, oh well, but all we're asking for is equality.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to get through to that. And to suddenly have someone say, okay, so you've got this grand movement that you claim has achieved so much, so name something. What have you achieved? And at one point, she was once again sort of weaving, if you know what I mean, after a challenge he had made.
It doesn't help that they identify as founders but not leaders. Yeah.
And he just came out and said, well, I just can't believe that we're just basically listening to her condone violence here. And she immediately, I didn't say that. I think you'll find I didn't say that. I'm on video and I didn't say that.
Yeah.
And the presenter, well, I think she doesn't think she said that. And he said, okay, fine, yeah, so... from what I heard there, you seem to be condoning it. So are you willing now to condemn the violence and the looting and the? Well, I think the real question here should be. No.
Yeah.
This is a yes or no answer that is required. Are you willing to condemn the violence? Well, I think you see what we really should be talking about was, and you could just see him rolling his eyes, going, "Oh, for the love of God!"
Yes, please answer the damn question.
But yeah, I mean, it was quite clear here was somebody who talks about, oh well, these are only people who the only way of expressing themselves. You just go, no. The only way of expressing themselves is not burning down a supermarket. This is ridiculous.
Yes, your followers do not need a new set of Nike trainers and a television that looted from a local store. This is not sending the message that you will think it's sending. Yes.
But then, when directly challenged on the BBC, will you condemn it?
No,
well,
of course
I think
not.
the real thing we ought to be talking about is, and you just go, well, yeah, so that's a no then.
Yes, of course, because then they'll smear him as trying to shut down the debate on this broader issue that she's then trying to bring up, rather than her avoiding a question.
It was interesting to watch, but it was also quite clear how strong the bias of the presenter was in trying to protect this glorious heroine, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. All right, Richard. We are way over time, actually. We are 2.5 hours in. Not that that's a bad thing or anything, but I will direct us back to the super chats, and we'll do the last 2. There are only 2 left, which is fine. Aaron Telford says, "Last of the Summer Wine is the best comedy." Smiley face.
Go away.
I haven't watched that much Last of the Summer Wine, but I don't know if I'd call it the like in terms of what I've heard people describe as the best comedy. I don't know if I'd describe it as the best. Britisher clearly feels quite strongly.
I think this is some sort of meme that is developing here.
It's a
there is no way that this is anywhere near even a good sitcom.
It's a trolly smiley face. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. This is Last of the Summer Wine is sort of mediocrity personified in comedy form. The main thing about Last of the Summer Wine was to be inoffensive, and by and large do the same gag again and again and again. I mean, I would challenge anybody to try and tell me just how many times the three gentlemen in question ended up going down a hill on a road in a bed on wheels. So yes, it's. I'm sorry, no, it just it's not.
Fair enough. You've been BTFO'd there, Aaron. Okay, the final super chat of the evening then is from Hollow1916, who says, expecting migrants to integrate into our countries is naive, I feel, in light of the last decade. As with all things, welfare is the root of all this. I think integration is certainly possible. From my own standpoint, it's a question of numbers and like just in-group preference as a whole. If you give people the incentive that they can either integrate into the country or they can go into a community which is exactly the same as the one they've come from, perhaps with some minor changes, they're going to go into the enclave and expand that. Especially if said enclave is not being policed in the same way as the rest of the country, and especially if they know they can get away with it. So it's, to me, yeah, go on.
I would sort of disagree with the idea that expecting people to integrate is naive as a universal statement.
Yes, I would,
because that's when you sort of think, well, who, for example? I mean, are we really saying some Poles will not integrate? We've seen quite a lot of Polish immigration. Do we really think that, say, 3 generations from now, they won't largely just be British? That they will sound British, they will act British. That's not what we're talking about.
It's interesting you talk about this particular example. I know some second generation Poles, so it's good that we're not totally there. I don't know what their kids would be like, but when it comes to them themselves, I would say, for instance, I would hesitate to call it a Polish community, but it's like the kind of the Polish sentiment within them, as it were, is very much there, and it's very clear where they're lacking a lot of general cultural knowledge. They're English in certain ways,
but do you
and
think
they're
that
very
is largely
Polish
because they're effectively living in Polish ghettos?
No, I mean they don't live in Polish ghettos. And they both, I mean, one of them is marrying an Englishman and the other is dating one, or a Scotsman at least, and it's with like, I mean, they haven't lived in a Polish ghetto anyway. In general, they do both speak Polish, but it's more like it's kind of like an anathema. It's a lack of desire to learn. Like, they'll learn because I'm their friend and they're interested, but they won't learn because they have like some inherent love of the country or something. They won't learn because it's something they've grown up with that it's kind of embarrassing not to know. Because London's very much like that, like there's so many. I mean, there are so many traditions and community practices that there is effectively none. So it's a, and again, I'd be interested to know the distinction between rural and
I mean, I'm
city poles. And that
I'm
sort of thing.
surprised because I would really think that when it comes to Europeans, I wouldn't really think there would be that much of a problem with integration. Again,
I don't
as
know.
you pointed out, I think that is there has to be an expectation of integration, and you know there should be some sort of societal pressure to integrate.
I guess.
And
I
if
guess.
not, then maybe you shouldn't be here.
I guess what I would point out is that American cities usually have a Chinatown, and British cities
Hmm.
usually do not, or haven't historically. And
Yes.
this makes a difference just in the general ethos of the place in terms of the expectation of integration versus the great melting pot of culture, right? Um, and this is not casting aspersion on either model, but just like we are far less like these things have not been around since our inception, as opposed to the other way around. Um, we'll see how it goes. I think we're in agreement here. I think that it's not a naive expectation to expect integration. But the length of time, the number of generations, and so on. Like one of my friends, she had a real crisis with the census, which has come up obviously recently, because she goes,
Hmm.
well, I've lived here for 15 years, nearly. I feel British in the sense that like I want to be a British citizen, I want to live here, I don't want to move back to Poland and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I feel like there's the Poland in my soul, and
Okay. Yes.
and obviously her family, which are broadly speaking in Poland. So it's a tough. I think it's difficult for immigrants and natives alike in terms of
Well, I think
conceptualizing the
a
relationship.
first immigrant, a first generation immigrant is always going to be the product of another country.
Yeah,
So you can perhaps expect of them to want to sort of integrate as well as they can and to bring up their children as British, but you can't effectively expect a first generation immigrant to, for example, now suddenly no longer hanker for the foods of the country in which they grew up. That seems to me quite natural. It's if you move to another country, you wouldn't suddenly not like fish and chips or roast
yeah,
beef.
yeah, yeah.
Do you understand what I mean? So you will invariably, if you're an immigrant, you will take with you um, some love, some hankering for sort of the old country, so to speak. But you will try to adapt, and you will then, in a way, almost see it. I think, at least, you should then see it as your duty to raise your children in the manner of that country. That's, I think, where everything is breaking down.
Mm.
And I perhaps, I'm much more of an optimist than most. These black-pilled people populating the world these days, telling us how it's all lost, it's all over, it's all. No, I think reactions take time. And I think we are seeing some sort of groundswell occurring, as we were talking about before with, France and Italy and whatever. We are seeing some sort of reaction rising. We don't know what exact shape it will take and how it will be. But my guess is it won't be, as some people always like to think, some cataclysmic event where swords clash and whatever. It will more be a matter of demands being made of politics, and that you then get the situation where someone like Macron suddenly says something you couldn't possibly have imagined him saying 2 or 3 years back, in which he suddenly says, well, look, if you can't accept cartoons in schools or whatever, then you might as well clear off. We don't want you here. And that is more than likely some of the tone we are to expect That basically, I think there is now a sort of understanding sinking in that this whole multicultural experiment was a mistake. And that doesn't now mean that suddenly, as I say, the tanks start rolling or whatever. It basically will just be put to these people that, okay, this model no longer works. It is hereby being abandoned. You will now have to live differently. If you don't want to, you will find life getting more and more difficult for you.
Yes. To mirror the chat, hello, is this the based department? Yeah, I think it's a very it's a very difficult conversation to have. I think it's a very it's subjective based on not just the national factor of whichever particular country you happen to be importing from, but also the individual cases themselves.
Put it like this. Go on. There were people who were against the multicultural thing.
And I am.
And they were just basically told, well, you have to put up with it. This is what it's like, you have to put up with it. And I think it will be exactly the same way the other way around. That basically, once the mainstream and mainstream politics becomes, in a way, opposed to the multicultural thing and basically starts telling people, you must assimilate, then the people who are opposed to that will just be told, well, you have to put up with it. In the same non-violent, kind of more societal pressure way in which the opposite was once upon a time sort of imposed, this will then be imposed. And as I say, I really don't think that it then means jackboots and uniforms and civil war and drastic. I just think it's basically the oil tanker turns round, and once it turns round, its momentum carries it invariably in the opposite direction. And I think what we are seeing is the grand old lady of an oil tanker turning round, and I think we all know where it's heading.
Do we now? Where do we think it's heading?
Yes, we don't know the specific way and whatever, but we know that it will mean that the European countries will begin to insist on assimilation. I think it's as simple as that.
Okay.
And yes, there will be people who will try to resist it and whatever, but I think, yes, there will also be people whom folks like Macron will then simply deport and just go, well, what's the point of you being here then?
Okay, yeah, fair enough. The as I say, it's just a question of when, as opposed to what.
I mean, it will get really drastic when the police start going from door to door and saying, "Have you seen the Charlton Heston version of Ben-Hur?" And when the answer is no, well, then who knows what might happen.
Okay, well,
then it's the Gulag.
I'll make sure to have at least that under my belt. Sorry, chaps, I'm a bit tired at this point of the evening, and I have finished my gin, which is also affecting mental faculties.
Well, that explains everything then.
All right.
I'm here with coconut water, and you're with gin.
Look. I had some gin to finish off. It's a nice Monday evening. I don't have work tomorrow, but I will still work, and that sort of thing. But anyway, thank you ever so much. I appreciate it's been a smaller audience this evening, but thank you everyone who has turned up. I really appreciate the core audience who come back time and time again. I don't know why you watch, but I'd love
the diehards. These are the hardliners.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't know necessarily why you watch, but I love that you do, and I really appreciate all of your comments in the live chat. I try and speak for a good amount of time, along with Bridger. When things are a bit more stable, I will be trying to get really more interesting guests on here as well, so it's not just the two of us blathering on about films and our own
come on, people, what more can you want? We've been mentioning condom liveried Formula One cars. I mean, where else do you get this?
And so on and so forth. Please please, if you are really interested in keeping this channel going, please consider heading to the merch store in the description, or joining the channel as a member, or sending in a super chat at some point. To everyone who has supported the stream this evening, thank you ever so much. Really, you are the lifeblood of this channel. You keep us going. You know, I'm not going to beg and that sort of thing, but thank you for your comments this evening, and really I hope that you have a fantastic week, and everything goes well for you.
We've come a long way. You began as the benign dictator of China with your portrait on the red book, and you're ending the show with "I'm not going to beg."
Indeed. And on that note, it is time to end. So thank you very much for joining me this evening, Britisher. I hope that you've enjoyed yourself.
It's been a pleasure as usual.
Oh, it's good. And we will see you all next week. I may run another chess stream in the meantime, but I expect to see the majority of you at Fake Accents next week. Thanks, folks. Take care, and good night.
Toodle pip.